if you take solace from Southern history in the past, there have always been people who refused to be overwhelmed, refused to be shut down, who spoke up.
Hi there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. If you are new to the podcast and the project, you can find a lot of information about who we are and what we're doing in Episode 1. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South at theprogressivesouth.org, a nonprofit media platform dedicating to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Kevin Kruse, a professor of history at Princeton University who has written extensively about the modern politics of the American South. That was his voice you heard at the top. Kruse is from the South, and he has a deeply informed perspective on the region's history and trajectory. We had a great conversation, and that is coming up later in the episode. Also, in our Arts and Culture segment, we'll talk about a long-running festival this weekend in Florida that celebrates the Sunshine State's folk art and culture and recognizes its diversity. But first, it's time for our weekly news roundup. This week, we're going to talk about emerging concerns and fights in several states over power. Literal power in the sense of electricity, and how much of it is being demanded by massive new data centers and crypto mining operations. These projects have potential consequences for their immediate neighbors, and also for the state's electrical grids and capacity. They have led to a certain amount of bipartisan concern among state legislators, but proposals to limit or restrain them have so far not come to much. We will link to sources with more information in our show notes. Let's start in Texas, where the exploding crypto industry is the focus of an excellent new article in the Texas Observer, with the headline, "The Crypto Racket. Public officials at all levels are propping up a Texas Bitcoin mining boom that's threatening water and energy systems while afflicting locals with noise pollution." The article by reporter Candace Byrne, which was co-published by The Nation magazine, details the remarkable, and to many residents threatening, surge in crypto mining in Texas since 2021. That's when Governor Greg Abbott declared in a social media post that, quote, "Texas is open for crypto business." His bid to attract the industry was well-timed, since that was the same year China, where many crypto industries had set up shop, banned crypto trading and mining altogether. The Lone Star State is now home to 40 crypto mines, making up more than 60% of all crypto mining locations in the United States. There are only 24 of them in the other 49 states combined. Now, I know that the whole concept of crypto mining is still kind of fuzzy to a lot of people. I'll link to an explainer in the show notes, but basically these so-called mines are just giant banks of computers running massive numbers of calculations to produce new, unique digital coins. Not all forms of cryptocurrency require mining. For example, digital coins like the ones issued by President Trump are more or less just created out of nothing, with no underlying math required. That's why they're called meme coins. But the oldest, most established, and most valuable cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, currently valued at about $103,000 per coin, does require mining. And mining requires electricity. Lots of it. If you want to envision what one of these mines looks like, just imagine an industrial park with rows of large rectangular buildings, most of them situated in rural areas. In Texas, the 15 largest mining operations each use more than 75 megawatts of energy just to keep running. Together, they consume about 3,200 megawatts, enough to provide power to 800,000 homes. The very largest use much more than that. The Texas Observer article focuses on the planned expansion of a 400-megawatt mine outside the small city of Corsicana in Navarro County, about an hour south of Dallas. Under a deal approved by Navarro County officials, the mine, operated by Riot Platforms, a Colorado company, will receive a tax abatement to more than double its capacity. If it proceeds as planned, it will become the world's first 1-gigawatt crypto mine. 1 gigawatt is enough energy to run a new city of 250,000 homes. Local residents often protest the locations of these facilities, as they did in Navarro County. But crypto mining is nearly unregulated in Texas, particularly in the unincorporated areas that the industry tends to favor. Rural residents' concerns revolve around several immediate impacts. In some cases, the mines are extremely noisy. All of that power and computing work creates a tremendous amount of heat, which has to be cooled down somehow. One option is giant fans on top of the mining buildings to suck the heat out. In many cases, those fans can be heard for a good distance. One woman told The Observer that the noise at night inside her house with the windows closed often exceeds 100 decibels. For comparison, the sound of a freight train 100 feet away from you is about 80 decibels. Some mines, like the one in Navarro County, use water cooling rather than fans. That addresses the noise problem, but it creates a different set of resource concerns, especially in a state where officials warn that persistent drought conditions could cause severe water shortages for towns and cities. And water is not the only thing Texas is in danger of running out of. Its electrical grid has long been overburdened. Severe winter storms in 2021 saw more than 4.5 million homes and businesses lose power in the midst of freezing temperatures. Just last week, Texas saw a blistering heat wave that set daily records of over 100 degrees in many places. Last Wednesday, May 14th, the state's power authority said statewide electrical use peaked at 78,000 megawatts, a record demand level for the month of May. And remember, 3,200 of those megawatts, about 4% of the total usage for a state of 31 million people, was going to its crypto mines. The Navarro County Commissioners, who approved a tax abatement deal last fall for the expansion of the Riot Platforms mine, were partly swayed by the company's promises of new jobs. It will nearly double its current workforce, from 150 people to 290. But that's the thing with crypto mining and large computing centers in general. They don't really need very many people to look after them. The new Riot mine will be the largest crypto site in the world, but it won't even be among the top 5 employers in Navarro County, a county of just 55,000 people, where a Russell Stover chocolates factory has more than 800 workers and the regional hospital employs 350. Outside of Texas, many states are contending with the growth of a different kind of large data center, those being built to power the ever-growing demands of artificial intelligence applications. The AI boom has both its champions and detractors on many fronts, from the challenges teachers and professors face in restricting its use by cheating students, to the efficiencies it can bring to many tasks, to its potential to eliminate many kinds of jobs in the near future. But for those who live near the giant computing centers being built all over the country, many of the concerns are more visceral. In Memphis, Tennessee, local residents are fighting against the expansion of a massive new computing center owned by billionaire Elon Musk. The data center, which Musk has dubbed Colossus, provides computing power for Grok, the AI system used by Musk's X social media company, formerly known as Twitter. Memphis officials, led by Mayor Paul Young, a Democrat, have championed the project, applauding Musk's $6 billion investment in redeveloping a vacant Electrolux factory in the economically distressed city's Boxtown district. Boxtown was established as a community of emancipated slaves and freedmen in the 1860s and has long been one of the poorest areas of the city. Its population remains about 99% black, and it abuts many industrial sites. Its residents rallied in 2020 against the extension of an oil pipeline by the fuel company Valero that would have cut right through the area. The public opposition, combined with falling fuel demand during the COVID pandemic, led Valero to abandon the project in 2021. Then Musk turned up in 2024. His Colossus plant currently occupies a space the size of 13 football fields, and he has plans to double his capacity. He recently purchased a second site in Memphis of 1 million square feet. But residents and environmental groups say the existing plant is already polluting the local air, with 35 methane gas turbines the company brought on site to help power it, before obtaining permits for them from the city. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas that contributes to global warming and has known serious health effects for human respiration and lungs. City officials and Musk representatives have said that only 15 of the turbines are currently operating, but thermal imaging by the Southern Environmental Law Center shows at least 33 active. The second site Musk has purchased is near an existing natural gas power plant owned by the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is capable of producing 780 megawatts of power. Although Musk has not yet indicated how the second site will be powered, the local utility company, Memphis Light and Water, has said that XAI requested a study of the impact of a demand level of 260 megawatts, which would equal 1/3 of the total output of the TVA plant. TVA itself has been supportive of Musk's plans, as have Tennessee's Republican senators, Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty. As with the crypto sites in Texas, Musk's AI farms produce little by way of employment. Officials have said that the first phase of the project will produce about 300 jobs, although it's unclear how many are permanent. The Memphis area has one of the higher unemployment rates in Tennessee, at 4.4%, and a workforce of about 600,000 people. 300 jobs is about 1/20th of 1% of that total. X is not the only Silicon Valley giant with big footprints across the South. Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, is investing $10 billion to build its largest data center yet near Monroe, Louisiana. Amazon has announced an $11 billion plan to build data centers in Butts and Douglas counties in Georgia, both rural areas. Elsewhere in Georgia, in Fayetteville, residents have struggled with new power lines being built across their properties by Georgia Power, the utility company, to serve a massive new data center funded by a company called QTS. QTS is owned by Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm, which has announced its intentions to be the leading investor in AI infrastructure. Its Fayetteville complex covers more than 600 acres and will consume as much power as 1 million homes. Although state governments have generally been supportive of the surge in data center development, some legislators have raised concerns about the impact on residents. In Georgia, a bill was introduced this year in the state Senate that would have forbidden utility companies from raising their rates for other customers to cover the cost of serving data centers. It had some bipartisan support. Sponsors included 16 Democratic senators and 5 Republicans, but died when the session ended in early April. In Arkansas, a proposed bill to monitor the power and water impact of crypto mining operations also languished in the legislature. And in crypto-happy Texas, the state Senate this year passed a bill that would place some new reporting and infrastructure requirements on anyone building data centers that would consume more than 75 megawatts. That bill has not yet made it through the Texas House, where it is being opposed by data companies as overly burdensome. Texas regulators, meanwhile, estimate that the state power grid will need to double its output by 2030 in order to keep up with the demand. Okay, now we're to our interview with Professor Kevin Kruse. You may be familiar with him from his writing in multiple books and publications, or from his active online presence. He is a historian who is engaged with both the past and present of Southern politics and governance, and I thought he could provide some needed context for our current circumstances. We had a great and informative discussion, and I hope you find it as valuable as I did. Seth, let's go to the tape. All right, joining me today is Kevin Kruse, a professor of history at Princeton University. He specializes in the political and cultural history of the United States in the 20th century, with particular attention to conflicts over race, rights, and religion. A graduate of Montgomery Bell Academy in Nashville and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, he has written extensively about the southern U.S. in particular. His first book, White Flight, Atlanta and the Making of Modern Conservatism, illuminated the shifts in white Southern politics after desegregation. He has also written about the rise of the religious right and Christian nationalism and the ways that our country has fractured politically and culturally in the past 50 years. He recently co-edited the book Myth America, that's M-Y-T-H America, a collection of essays by historians trying to set the record straight on popular misconceptions about our nation's history. And he is active outside academia as well, with an excellent newsletter called Campaign Trails, which you can find and subscribe to, a lively presence on social media, and appearances in a range of traditional and new media outlets, including this one. So welcome, Professor Kruse. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Call me Kevin.
I want to note here as we're recording this, because I don't know exactly when we're going to be broadcasting it, but this is the end of the first week of February. So, of course, we are all currently kind of trying to absorb the ongoing hyperactivity of our new presidential administration and all of its implications. And a lot has happened in the last 3 weeks. I'm sure a lot more will happen in the next few months. So if you are listening to this, just kind of keep that context in mind. And we may be touching on some of those themes a little bit, because I feel like some of what we're seeing at the national level right now has been to some degree
foreshadowed by some of what those of us who live in the South have already been seeing in recent years. And a lot of the history and legacies that have contributed to that are the things we're going to be talking about today. So, Kevin, I guess the first thing I want to ask you is kind of a personal question, which is, how do you characterize your relationship with the South? You're a professor at Princeton.
Yeah.
You went to a school in Nashville and North Carolina. So, and you've done all this scholarship about the South, but you're also now kind of observing it a little bit from a distance. Do you call yourself a Southerner when you talk about the South?
Oh yeah, all the time. I'm both an historian of the South and an historian from the South, and I think those are kind of mutually reinforcing identities. And even though I've written a lot about kind of national politics, every time I've done that, it's included the South as part of that, as kind of a leading edge of what I'm talking about. And I've, like any expat, I think my identity has only become more pronounced as a Southerner living in the wilderness of New Jersey. Much like an American living in Paris, I think might become more self-consciously American. I'm much more self-consciously Southern. And I get defensive about it. I get critical about it. It's the same way you can. It's like talking about a member of your family, right? I can criticize the South, but I won't let anyone else tackle it because they don't quite understand it.
So, like you said, you've written a lot about Southern political and cultural history, especially looking at the civil rights movement and sort of its legacy and its impact. So as a first question, I'm curious just how the South looks to you now politically. There's a lot of talk about the shifts that came out of the civil rights movement and the shift to the Republican Party, and we're going to be talking a bit about that. Mm-hmm. But now we're at this point where it's not quite monolithically red. You certainly have some states still with Democratic governors and so forth. But overall, it's a very Republican-controlled area, Republican supermajorities in most of the legislatures. And my experience in Tennessee over the last 30 years is that our legislature has been moving in this increasingly sort of aggressive and even kind of authoritarian direction in their rule, in ways that, at least superficially to me, seem kind of reminiscent of what I read about the Southern legislatures of the segregation era, when they were really aggressively defending, what they called their states' rights. And this comes decades after talk of a new South with, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, like avatars of Southern progress. And I have to say that living here now, it doesn't exactly feel like a new South, or it certainly doesn't feel like that new South that was sort of promised. So where are we now in the South?
Yeah, I mean, as we noted, the South is not monolithic. And for all the talk from political historians about the solid South, when it used to be a solidly Democratic bloc and now it's been recently a solidly red bloc, it's always in a state of flux, right? And so it really depends on where you're at. And what's really been remarkable over the last decade is that the states of what we used to call the border South, right, the more moderate ones like Tennessee and North Carolina, which always used to kind of be in flux. Tennessee has long had a Republican leadership, but it was kind of a moderate Republican. Lamar Alexander, Bill Frist, on and on. It was that kind of style.
Howard Baker.
Howard Baker is the absolute right model of this, right? Someone who was a Republican, but not a kind of fire-breathing Strom Thurmond, deep South kind of guy. And North Carolina had even more of that. North Carolina was a state that held out with Democratic leadership for a good long time. Still has Democratic governor. The state house, again, like the state house in Tennessee, the legislature is hard right. Meanwhile, Georgia, which used to be kind of a bedrock, I think that was where Newt Gingrich came from, and Bob Barr, all those folks, has trended purple, right? We've got two Democratic senators from Georgia right now. So it's constantly in a state of flux. And I think it's a reminder to us that, it's not static, but also it's not monolithic. And we've got to kind of appreciate the nuances. I get really furious when national observers, especially in this moment we're in right now, again, we're talking in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, those southern states voted for Trump, those people deserve it. Well, they didn't all vote for Trump. Right? And even if they did, I don't think you could say people deserve to get, kind of a political comeuppance here. And so I'm always conscious about the kind of the blue, the purple dots, bigger than dots in some places that are in supposedly red states. It's much more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to one of the things that you've written about a lot, and you have a chapter about it in Myth America, is the Southern strategy, which I think is a familiar concept to most people. It's been sort of a standard part of our political and historical lexicon for decades. The shift that happened in the South from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party over the course of the fights over segregation and the civil rights movement. And it's interesting that you felt compelled to include a chapter on that in the Myth America book, because the myth that you're addressing here is not that, the Southern strategy wasn't real. You're pushing back against a more recent narrative that has started to arise that has been trying to kind of rewrite that history. So what is that? What is the narrative that you are pushing back against in that chapter?
Yeah, if you told me 10 years ago, I would have to basically write a long piece that said the Southern strategy was a real thing, I would have been very depressed. But what we've seen over the course of the first Trump administration, and we're seeing it again now, is a sudden switch on the part of Republican partisans who want to pretend that their party is not racist now by arguing that it never had been racist before, right? And that's a stark change. I mean, if you just go back to the George W. Bush administration, there was a real effort on the part of Republicans to reckon with this past, right? George W. Bush himself had a racially diverse administration. People like Colin Powell, Condi Rice, Alberto Gonzalez were in high positions of power. He made an effort to win over Black and Latino voters. There are ample reasons you could make a pitch to them on issues of cultural conservatism, what have you. And leaders of the Republican Party, of the Republican National Committee specifically, Ken Mehlman and Michael Steele, himself an African-American, both publicly acknowledged and apologized for it. There was an effort on the part of Republicans 15 years ago to turn the page from this past, to acknowledge that that's what they used to be, that's not what they are now. What we've seen recently, and it's been promoted by kind of partisan hacks like Dinesh D'Souza and other people on social media, is a total denial of that history, right? They have claimed that the Republican Party is 100% still the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, the party that ended slavery, the party that stood against segregation in its early age, and that nothing has ever changed, right? And it's, in one way, it's kind of a remarkable story because they've written out the conservative takeover of the Republican Party. They've written out the Goldwater movement and the Southern strategy that got them into power in the first place. But at a more basic level, it's just ridiculous. It's a denial of obvious, clear fact. I start off the essay by responding to a political scientist from Tennessee named Carol Swain, who has run for political office as a Republican in Tennessee. And in her old work, she used to do what we all did, which is acknowledge this thing that actually existed. Recently, she has claimed that this was a conspiracy cooked up in the present day by liberal academics and reporters to make the Republican Party look bad. It's laughable. So the essay was an effort to just kind of lay out the record of this thing that has been not even hiding. It's just been in plain sight.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that's so remarkable to me about it is that none of this was secret. You know, if you go back and just read the day-to-day newspaper coverage or watch the TV coverage of the civil rights movement and of all the politics shaping it, everybody knew what they were talking about. Even the people who kind of cloaked it in language of states' rights, everybody knew what states' rights they were very specifically talking about. And I certainly encounter that with, you know, people who say, well, you know, the KKK was made up of Democrats and the segregationists were all Democrats. And I mean, that is also true. Sure. But we know the story of that and we know how things got from sort of where they were to where they are. And in your book about Atlanta white flight and kind of the impact that the desegregation movement had on Atlanta and on white politics in particular in Georgia and across the South, one of the points that you make is that in absorbing that whole demographic, the sort of white Southern, you know, I guess segregationist demographic, the Republican Party gained voters, but bringing those people into the fold changed the Republican Party, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big part of the shift to the modern Republican, modern conservative movement that we have now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes place, there's a long arc. I think the people who argue against the existence of the Southern strategy intentionally shift the conversation to topics where it didn't actually happen, right? So they focus on congressional representatives, right? Strom Thurmond switched parties, but no one else did. Well, that's because no one else could, right? Strom Thurmond got a very sweet deal in which the Republicans allowed him to keep all his seniority and therefore all his power. Other senators asked about this. They probed it, and the Republican Party wasn't willing to give away the store again, so that didn't happen. Instead, change happens from the bottom up, and it doesn't just happen in 1 year. People often say, oh, 1964, it was suddenly, you mean to tell me everyone suddenly switched? No, it's a process that takes place over decades. 1964, with the campaign of Barry Goldwater running against the Civil Rights Act while Lyndon Johnson is passing the Civil Rights Act, is a key hinge point. And you start to see, that's where you see, Goldwater wins Arizona and 4 states of the Deep South. That's it. That's a real sign of this shift. But it's a much longer process here, right? And it's one in which you see Republicans realizing that to be a national party, they have to have a national appeal. And after decades of writing off the South, where they were regarded as the party of Lincoln, the party of Reconstruction, the party of carpetbaggers and scalawags, right? They realize that they've got to make a pitch. And they realize that Southern segregationists are conservative on a lot of issues. They agree with them on labor. They agree with them on unions. They agree with them on opposition to the minimum wage, the New Deal, and all these other things. They're pro-business. The sticking point is civil rights. They still think of the Republican Party as the party of civil rights. And so they come to realize, Republicans do, that if they're going to have a national base, they've got to bury this issue, right? They've got to hide it. And it starts as early as the Dixiecrat Rebellion. In the wake of that, the Republican National Committee Chairman Guy Gabrielson goes down to Alabama and makes a pitch. Says, Dixiecrats, you are Republicans. Come join us. Come support this party. In 1952, in the Eisenhower campaign, Dixiecrats paved the way from across the South. The Republican Party runs former Dixiecrats for governor in Alabama and Florida in 1954. On and on and on, right? The first wave of Republican House members in the South aren't racial liberals, right? They are indistinguishable from their Southern Democratic colleagues in their support of segregation. They are shouting about Little Rock. They are opposed to the Civil Rights Act of 57 and 60 and 64, right? So they are constantly making this case. It's not that the Republican Party, not that the Democratic Party in the South was racially liberal. They were both racially conservative, and they're fighting over that vote together, right? And it becomes a two-party South. And some of it is in code words about states' rights, but a lot of it is out in the open, right? So in that piece, I talk about some of the congressmen who did switch. Bill Dickinson, who'd been a Democratic congressman for Alabama, switches to the Republican Party in 1964, and he says, I have joined the white man's party. It's not subtle, right? And so you could argue that there are all these other factors that waved into this. They're very clear that they're doing this because they see the Republican Party as the future for fighting against the civil rights movement, which has now been embraced by Democrats, right? They feel betrayed by the Democrats. They want to move over there. So it's a story that has a long arc, and it's not really until it starts in the 40s, doesn't end until really the 90s, the 2000s, when you start to see a lot of state legislatures finally turn. But it's a process that unfolds bit by bit. The way in which any kind of major political realignment that we talk about in American history happens. It happens slowly and over time. I liken it to a glacier, right? It moves very slowly, but it thoroughly changes the landscape as it moves. And that's the way to think about it.
And the foundation to it is just undeniably the fight over civil rights and over segregation. Like that was the key turning point.
Absolutely.
And so in kind of thinking about where we are now and what this has brought us to in the South, I've been fascinated for a long time about the period after Reconstruction. So, after the Civil War, you have this brief period of Reconstruction where Black Americans have the temerity to act as if the wording in the new constitutional amendments means what it says, and they start to assert their political and economic rights of citizenship. And then, of course, after the Compromise of 1876 and the withdrawal of federal troops, that all kind of goes out the window. And by the turn of the 20th century, the Jim Crow order is pretty strongly in place everywhere across the South. And then, then it takes another more than half a century to kind of claw back to some promise of racial equality in the South. Are we going through that again now? Is that what's happening? I mean, we kind of coming out of the Civil Rights Movement. Of course, you have the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all of these federal institutions that are put in place to enforce those. And then you start pretty quickly chipping away at that. Reagan is out there attacking affirmative action. The Supreme Court, bit by bit, starts, kind of reconsidering parts of the Voting Rights Act. And now we're to a point, like here in Tennessee and across a lot of the South, we have legislatures just passing laws saying, basically, you can't talk about, real American racial history, which was also a big part of the Jim Crow era, right? We couldn't really talk about real Civil War history. How is this, reactionary pushback similar to that? How is it different?
I think it's very similar. I mean, that period after Reconstruction, from the perspective of white Southerners who tried to undo and unwind it, was known as redemption, right? And I think the Make America Great mantra is another effort at redemption, about pushing back from what they see as the excesses of gains by not only gains by racial minorities, but also a sensitivity of the national government to racial minorities, right? And so what we've seen here is it's been under the guise of pushing back against DEI, which is a term corporations came up with basically to cover their behind so they didn't get sued for discrimination measures. But they're acting like it was some kind of grand liberal plan to elevate the unworthy, right? And so it's really an extension of the long-standing arguments against affirmative action. And we've seen this movement target not just DEI, but they've gone all the way back to affirmative action orders that Lyndon Johnson passed in 65, right? So we should be clear. The civil rights era is under assault. It's been under assault for a while. The Roberts Court, with its reprehensible holdings in Shelby County, v. Holder, gutted the Voting Rights Act and gutted it with a simplistic view of history that, well, everything is fine now. There's no discrimination now. We should roll this back because it's not needed. Justice Ginsburg, in her dissent, noted that was like saying, I've got the umbrella up and I'm not getting wet, therefore it's not raining anymore, right? And so we've seen a real assault on this, and it's a real pushback. I think there's no way to overstate the level of racial animus and kind of a restoration of what can be properly called white supremacy in the MAGA movement, right? And so it's very much like what we saw in Redemption. In fact, moving beyond it, right? There was no effort during the Redemption era to deny birthright citizenship, right? Once the Supreme Court handled that in the case in the 1890s, it was considered settled law, right? Now they're trying to unwind that. And so they're assaulting the clear language of the Civil War amendments in a variety of ways. And it's really disturbing.
Right. We're not just rolling back the 1960s, we're rolling back the 1860s.
Correct. Yeah.
So given all of that, and given that I know many progressives across the South, I mean, for years now, and I think especially now after the most recent presidential election, feel so, kind of isolated, marginalized. Progressives are marginalized in the South politically by gerrymandering, among other tactics. Is there any hope from history? We have been through these cycles of sort of advancement and retrenchment when it comes to issues of social and economic and political equality and rights. Certainly things have gone forward and come back in different ways before? What are the, there certainly are many people, organizations, political groups across the South still organizing, still active. What are their options? What are the ways that these things change when they do change?
Well, the first thing, and again, it's easy for me to say this in New Jersey, the first thing you've got to do is not give up, right? Is to recognize that for all the intent that they want to make you feel isolated and alone and cut off, that there is a larger community out there. And that's one thing I think an advantage we have over that era, where you can reach out on the internet, social media, television, whatever, to find like-minded people across the region, across the country, who will help support you, right? If we think back to the people of that era, they were truly isolated, right? I mean, you would smuggle in a newspaper from the north to try to get news about what was going on, right? Or you might find maybe some like-minded people in a university town that you could plan to come back with. But you're not alone, right? And so that's the start. How can you push back? I think, again, the secret here is not to get overwhelmed by the seemingly massive movement at the national level. That's we're in the middle of their effort to flood the zone with shock and awe techniques right now, and it feels overwhelming. Again, even where I'm sitting, it feels overwhelming, and I get that. But that's what they want. They want you to feel overwhelmed. They want you to feel powerless. They want to feel that everything's written off. It's not. Right, and if you take solace from Southern history in the past, there have always been people who refused to be overwhelmed, refused to be shut down, who spoke up, and sometimes not without danger to themselves. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't come with cost, but who stuck to their guns. Sometimes literally, but more often not metaphorically, right? And be able to speak out through the press, through publications, mobilizing. I think staging protest is still a time-honored way to do this. And I saw over the weekend, there were protests at the Capitol in Nashville and Frankfurt and Montgomery, all over the South. And I think it's through that kind of community response that you can make sure that you are not invisible, and you are not overlooked. The last thing to do is to remain active in politics. And I know it can seem overwhelming, but again, we've seen signs of breakthroughs in Southern politics that would have been remarkable, unthinkable a decade or two ago, right? Virginia is now, I think, solidly blue. When all my life it was a bastion of kind of Republican strength. Georgia is purple and on the teetering on the edge, right? There's a way in which Republicans have burrowed in and have made pushback very hard. In North Carolina and Tennessee, they keep changing the rules to undercut Democratic officials. Don't take it lying down. Keep fighting back. There are good people around you who are fighting the good fight, and you'll benefit from helping each other.
All right. Well, those are good words and good thoughts, and it's a great perspective. I mean, it is one thing that I try to tell people is that I actually take a certain amount of solace in American history, just in knowing that, like, things have often been very bad in American history.
Yeah. Yeah. I often talk about, I have an optimism that grows out of my pessimism, right? That I know, I think people who feel really depressed in this moment think that there weren't problems in the past. And that's one of the things I think we do as American historians, as professors, to really remind people that there were overwhelmingly dark moments in the American past, and we rode through it too, right? And so you think about the Great Depression or the chaos of 1968 or the Civil War is a dramatic one. We have made it through tough times before, and we can do it again.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for talking with me, and people can find you at your Campaign Trails newsletter. And what social media are you active on these days?
I'm just on Blue Sky these days. You can find me under my name, Kevin M. Kruse, on Blue Sky.
All right. Great. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure, Jesse.
The Florida Folk Festival is taking place this weekend, from May 23rd to 25th at Stephen Foster Folk Culture Center State Park in White Springs. The festival was established in 1953 during a boom in interest in folk music across the country, and it has been multicultural from the start, representing the range of people who call the state home. The very first edition of it included performances and presentations of traditional music and dance by Menorcans, Seminole and Miccosukee Indians, African Americans, Scots-Irish, and people of Greek, Jewish, Czech, and Spanish descent. This year's festival will feature representatives of many of those groups, along with featured Mexican, Haitian, Puerto Rican, Peruvian, and other performers and presenters. In addition to concerts, the festival offers workshops and instruction on old-time banjo playing, beekeeping, contra dancing, Afro-Cuban dance, and much more. Although this will be its 73rd year, its mission to celebrate and pay respect to the state's wide range of cultures feels maybe more urgent and necessary than ever. As we discussed last week on the podcast, Florida has set itself up under Governor Ron DeSantis as the nation's leading enforcer of immigration laws, conducting statewide sweeps that have traumatized its immigrant communities. DeSantis has also attacked state programs and offices intended to promote diversity. The festival is a reminder that state leaders have not always taken such a harsh view of Florida's complex cultural matrix, and that matrix persists anyway, despite the xenophobic rhetoric. Stephen Foster Folk Culture Center State Park, by the way, is in northern Florida, along the Suwannee River, which is why it's named after Foster. The popular 19th century songwriter was not from Florida. He was from Pittsburgh. But he turned the river into a symbol of Southern heritage in his song Old Folks at Home. That song, of course, is notoriously racist in its original version, sung in stereotypically black Southern dialect from the perspective of an older enslaved man longing for his old plantation. Because of its reference to the Suwannee River, and, no doubt, its warm view of the antebellum South, Old Folks at Home was named Florida's state song in 1935. In 2008, after years of effort by African Americans in the state, the legislature formally adopted revised lyrics for the song, which dropped the dialect and the plantation. In its own way, the song itself is now part of Florida folk culture, and one that at least implicitly recognizes its many layers. That wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Our donations go through our fiscal sponsor, Community Shares, who oversee contributions for several organizations. So please make it easy for them to know who it's for. Next week, we head to Raleigh, North Carolina, and meet up with one of the Tar Heel State's most progressive state legislators. Come on along. Thanks to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. We'll talk to you soon.